Time now for the 10-minute war, which means we bring in our good friend and perhaps the one and only reasonable Ohio State fan, Mark Rogers, who himself has a fantastic channel right here on YouTube. Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. Good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Steve. I'm still looking for that opportunity to debunk that title as the reasonable Ohio State fan. Well, I think we'll get there at some point, maybe this season.
That is exactly what I am afraid of, brother. So let's get to it. Michigan opening up fall camp on Friday. The rest of the Big Ten will all be opened up at some point this week. And I laid out to start off the show here this week 5 questions, and I think Michigan needs affirmative answers to all 5 in order to avoid the kind of season no one wants to have, the kind of season we Michigan fans want to have, and frankly, Jim Harbaugh needs. There's one of those in particular I want to start off with zeroing in on and get your perspective on, because I shared an anecdote that I recently heard on the podcast with Chris Ballas from the Wolverine with former All-Big Ten Michigan offensive lineman Doug Skeen, who, by the way, is a national treasure. And Skeen was talking about it just blew his mind watching film last year, and he didn't want to call the player out by name, but he gave the position. All right. So there's only a few guys playing tight end, and that was the position. He said it just blew his mind watching film of games last year and just watching a certain tight end just take plays off. And then he'd be right back in the lineup like the next play or the next series. He said, you know, when I played at Michigan and I was recruited and originally played for the same head coach, Bo Schembechler, that Jim Harbaugh was recruited and played for. So I know the culture that he was recruited into because I was recruited into the same one. And all 5 years I played at Michigan, we won Big Ten championships. And all 5 years I played there. If we did a film session and you were caught taking plays off, the coaches in front of the entire team would stop the session. They would then go to you specifically and say, please enlighten the rest of your teammates why you reserved yourself the right to let them down by taking that play off. And then we'll wait. And that this wasn't about you let the program down or you let the coaches down, you let your brothers down. And he said the level of integrity and camaraderie and competitiveness that instilled on a cultural level, he goes, you just watched film of Michigan, particularly last year, you just did not see that. When you hear that from the other side of the fence, what's your reaction to that, Mark?
Well, my reaction is that nobody knows better than the other players on the field as to how much they can trust their brothers. The other guys on the field. Sure, you could take a play off and maybe get away with it, but if you're taking plays off during the game when it matters, I'm sure he's taking plays off, this particular tight end, during practice while other guys are out there busting their butt. So it's just a breakdown in culture, which I believe begins with trust. I don't think you have any kind of culture if you don't have trust, and then you also have to have some level of competency. So if whether it's between from player to player or player to coaching staff, you have to believe that the guy next to you is capable of carrying out the assignment, whether that's a coach, that he's competent, he's knowledgeable, he knows what he's doing, or that's a player next to you who's going to be hardworking and put forth the effort, but also has a level of talent that matches what is supposed to be produced at that school. And then beyond that, the trust. Can you trust what they say? Can you trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do? And I think those are pretty much the 2 biggest factors in any culture regarding athletics in particular, but anywhere, is the trust factor and then the competency factor.
When you hear about stuff like that happening at a program of Michigan stature, with the head coach who both played and coached, who both played here and now coaches here, but played here at a time that the program was among 4 or 5, set apart programs in the rest of the country as the elite of the elite. And you wonder why heading into year 7, you're still having conversations and discussions about stuff like that. What do you say to that?
It reminds me of what I heard Jim Mora talk about when he took over UCLA, in that there were players that just would decide on a particular day to miss practice at a major college football program. Like, I couldn't imagine that happening in junior high or high school where I participated, a player just after school deciding I'm not going to football practice and heading home on the bus. That like didn't happen, and that's happening at UCLA. So I think that maybe at times I believe that these programs are on a more even plane or operating on the same level, more so than maybe they really are, and that there are issues to that degree at a place like Michigan. And then for that to be, that's supposed to be something that the new head coach is cleaning up from the previous regime. And then you give that year, 2 years of buffer to weed out the bad seed and to get rid of it and to move on from there and to clean it up. But when that has become the culture after 6 or 7 years, then, man, that's going to lead to what you have predicted. And that's the end of the Jim Harbaugh era, I would think.
So we've seen coaches attempt to do this before when the culture or the program is kind of leveled off, or the culture has kind of begun to exhibit some form of diminishment. And a lot of times it will be a massive reshuffling of the coaching staff. I can think of a couple that worked. Bob Stoops did it at Oklahoma, not quite to the level we have, but they did quite a reshuffling there, and that's where Lincoln Riley came in. Obviously, that was a tremendous success. I think of Brian Kelly after the 4-8 season of 2016. And the next year, I think they won 9 games. And then the year after that, they were in the playoff. And it's completely reestablished his program, so it's worked out great. Most of the time, though, when programs do this, it is a precursor to, we'll be making a head coaching change next year as well. So as a guy that follows this sport as closely as anybody I know does, what are your signs for whether you think this thing is actually self-correcting or whistling past the graveyard? And are those things that you probably just won't see or hear about in camp, and you just have to wait until adversity strikes during the year when the games count? How do you respond to that?
It's almost like our discussion going back a week to reviewing Jim Harbaugh's performance at Big Ten Media Days. When you're not there, when you don't know firsthand what's going on, you have to go with logic. You've got to go with probabilities. And you just stated the probabilities of the situation, which for me are that people don't change, especially 50-year-olds do not change. Generally, yes, there are enlightenment phases for some people out there that something has to drastically happen. Sometimes divine intervention has to take place. This is a football circumstance, so we're not going to go to that level. And we're going to say that Jim Harbaugh is the man that arrived at Michigan, but maybe a little bit declined from that version of a Jim Harbaugh. So I cannot in any way imagine, and I might be wrong, and the Michigan fans are going to hope that I'm wrong, that I expect that these changes are going to be the type changes that are going to be permanent, that are going to be anything substantial or substantive, that are beyond just a feel-good reset. Hey, it's like, how many times do we see the gyms flooded after the first of the year because people are resetting to be a different person, and those people are nowhere to be found in March. And so I'm going to go with my evaluation of human nature, of probabilities, and that Jim Harbaugh is a good football coach that under certain circumstances previously had the drive, had the energy, and probably had some things go his way that he was able to turn around a program or a situation. But after 6 years at Michigan, he's proven that they're going to win their share of games, but it's not going to be anywhere close to the Michigan standard.
In a way, though, ultimately, it doesn't really matter what you and I think. It matters what those players think, right? And what the discernment or what attracts or what motivates 19, 20, 21-year-old men is a little bit different than guys our age, right? And so it really comes down to, do they buy into it? Really, right? Do they? Because if they do, then you end up with something that is infectious the other way.
So what gives me some hope for the Michigan fan here is what Jim Harbaugh said last week about Mike Macdonald. Well, first of all, we know that this guy succeeded in the NFL. So there's a level of competency right there. And then again, we both agreed that Jim Harbaugh was more detailed, specific than at almost any other time in a insightful way. And so if Mike Macdonald getting a little bit more to the football and the culture at the same time, but a little bit more to the football and fixing a defense that had been good, but we know what the limitations were under Don Brown, I think that Jim Harbaugh was speaking to his players and speaking of Mike Macdonald, but also taking a shot at Don Brown because of his inability or his stubbornness in not changing the defense and altering the defense against certain teams in certain situations, where Jim Harbaugh was adamant about Mike Macdonald's ability to look at situations, to look at players, to see what they do well, what they don't do well, and to be a guy who is able to make the changes in the scheme and in the role for the particular player that is going to maximize the defensive efficiency.
So the word around Ann Arbor is that when Ryan Day came in as OC of Ohio State, he figured out how to crack the code of Don Brown's defense when he realized this thing is so simple that if I just put a tight end in motion, I can pretty much gauge from the sideline what Michigan's going to do defensively on every snap. And there's talk that Ohio State actually knew what Michigan's signals were on defense. So they literally knew what play was coming or what alignment Michigan was in before they even tried to disguise something. Are you buying any of that from an Ohio State perspective?
I tend to buy it because as soon as you set up a situation like that, I think of the 2003 Super Bowl, the Oakland Raiders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we know John Gruden left Oakland, went to Tampa Bay. There was so much known about that he, in developing quarterbacks, knew about Rich Gannon, knew about the system that he implemented at Oakland, knew that Bill Callahan was not necessarily the brightest coach in the world in certain aspects to be able to change that system, and that they were running his offense. And we know what the result was. 4 interceptions, 2 pick sixes. They just knew exactly what was coming. We also know that Ohio State is the most talented offense that Michigan faces most seasons, but the degree of the productivity the last 2 times out has been through the roof in comparison to the gap between those 2 teams and what should have been on the field and on the scoreboard and in the yardage statistics between an Ohio State offense and a Michigan defense. So I can believe that. It seemed as simple as Ohio State just running crossing routes that they were able to outflank the Michigan defense and just get in space and make it just a pitch and catch game, and we saw the result of that. So I can believe that. I can believe that based, again, on what the Michigan defense was able to do against everybody else, knowing that they were playing the most talented offense, but seeing that productivity just go through the roof twice in a row.
All right, so within the next couple of weeks, let's wrap it up with this. The Big Ten Network will be undergoing its fall camp tour. And of course, you know, if you've been watching this, and I think this is one of the coolest things they've done from the very beginning of the channel, but also understand that you're going to get essentially a glorified sports information director take on this. Now, in recent years, Jerry DiNardo has gotten a little bit more direct and pointed in some of his observations. I recall, I think it was, 2018 when Wisconsin, I think was, or 2017 preseason, no, 2018 was preseason number 4 after they had that great 13-win team. And DiNardo came out of Wisconsin camp and said, I don't like, this doesn't, kind of feels like a team that's, read a lot of press clippings last year. I just didn't sense the same edge, eye of the tiger. And then Wisconsin went out that year and had, by their standards, a disappointing season. So Jerry's been a little bit more pointed in his comments in recent years, but overall, they're going to try to put a positive spin on everything they can, okay? So you got to kind of look for little code words or phrases. When they visit Michigan's camp, and then they do their special on it that night, what are you going to be looking for?
Well, I will add to the code words or to the positive spin. I will add a very generic take. If we could chronicle the terminology that's used to describe team after team after team. I think you can take a blueprint of Illinois and lay it down on the Purdue and then lay it down on the Minnesota. Anyway, I will stop bashing the Big Ten Network's approach to its commentary on these teams and its camp visits. The code words for Michigan, I think, is there's going to be a level of, there was a comment made to my channel yesterday about the Michigan football crowd. And it was always my thought that unless there was something extremely to be excited about, that at times could be the quietest 112,000 people that you could find in one gathering anywhere on planet Earth. And I almost feel like that either it was feeding off the team or the team was feeding off of that. But it's a very briefcase type program to us in certain ways. And that's one. I don't see it as a very energized team on most occasions. They've never been there for practice, of course, but I got to think that that's one thing.
The energy level. Yeah. Yeah.
The energy level of this football team, and in seeing some true confidence and
I mean, we saw this last year. They would literally come out of the locker room and stroll out of the locker room, like stroll, and I get it. The fans aren't there and, the band isn't there. I get all of that, but it wasn't there for Indiana either. You know what I mean? And they had like their best season in 30 years. So I get it. That is on an internal level, can they produce their own energy? Because here's the thing, the fans are going to turn at the first sign of adversity because they're that disillusioned right now. And so if you're a Michigan football program, you cannot count on your fans lifting you up until you first give them a reason to. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're going to be generally excited and supportive and everything else, but at the first sign of adversity, the mood's going to be, seen this one before, know how it ends, here we go again. So this is where the team, you're right, they do have to show on an internal level, can they generate some energy and excitement?
And I'm not even the guy that typically is the one that looks at that. I think that that's typically overplayed, but I think for this team in this situation, that matters. And that's going to be some insight that we need to hear about. And also, it's just strange to me, a guy that, again, I try to take the numbers, the metrics, and all of that and not just lay it out there, but put some context to it because it should give you the story if you really look at it. And for a Michigan team that's basically been disappointing for 6 games, it was a half a season last year. This COVID pandemic season and just the offseason leading into that season and then the one that's followed has just been more damaging to this program than it should have been for a team that simply went from winning 9 and 10 games a year to a 2-4 season and on to a 2021 season that's supposed to be played to its completion. It's just odd that 6 games. So it hasn't been the 6 games. It's been this entire narrative of Michigan football for the past year and a half that they've got to get past. But it's odd to me that it's really only played on the field for 6 games.
Mark, great stuff, man. We'll do it again soon. All right, take care.